Welcome back to another episode of Sal and Pals Go to the Movies. This is another Throwback Thursday review, and I'm here with my friend Touly. Say hi, Touly.
Hey, everyone.
And today we're going to be reviewing Clue from 1985. And just fair warning, there's going to be spoilers up ahead, so you've been warned. 6 guests are invited to a strange house and must cooperate with staff to solve a murder mystery. And this is based on the board game Clue. Let's start off by going down the list of the cast members in this movie. We have Miss Peacock, played by Eileen Brennan Wadsworth, played by Tim Curry. Miss White, played by Madeline Kahn. Mr. Green, played by Christopher McKean. Professor Plum, played by Christopher Lloyd. Colonel Mustard, played by Martin Mull. Miss Scarlet, played by Doily Ann Warren. We have Yvette, played by Colleen Camp. Mr. Body, played by Lee Ving. And we have the singing telegram girl, played by Jane Wilding. And she's most popular known for being the guitarist in the group The Go-Go's. Let's start off by saying that this movie, when it originally came out in theaters, it has 3 alternate endings that were recorded that played in theaters. So depending what showing you went to, you got either ending A, B, or C. If you wanted to see all 3, you would have to go back and watch it. And sometimes they did tell you which ending it was going to be, what showtime, so you would plan accordingly. There's actually rumors of a 4th one being recorded, but when the director has been asked or the cast, they don't remember what the 4th ending was. The only person that remembers some bits is Tim Curry. I think he's getting it confused with the actual novel. So just take it for a grain of salt. This is all I came up with. There's people who saying that's the true 4th ending and other people saying that he's mistaken. Even the director doesn't remember it because there is no original script of the 4th ending. So let's get into the review. What I liked about this movie is that when I was a kid, my cousins used to play the Clue, the board game, and I, as being a little kid, didn't really get to play with them because I was not the age that they would include me into the board game. I was too young. Then I would be watching TV and Clue, the movie, would be on TV. And this is the time when I grew up with the show Ghost Rider. So I was always walking around with my little notebook acting like I was a gumshoe. And when I saw this movie about a murder mystery, I started saying like, oh, if I see this movie and I find out who did it, I'm going to be guaranteed to be able to play with my cousins. It didn't work out that way because the movie, if you even try to find clues and everything, there is no clues. It doesn't really play that way. The only thing about this movie that I really enjoy nowadays is the one-liners and the lines that the characters deliver and how the characters interact with each other. This movie, to me, it's a movie that you would put on and just watch for these characters, watch the actors before they went on to star in famous movies. For example, Christopher Lloyd here playing Professor Plum, he was not in Back to the Future yet. So you did not know him from Back into the Future. But now, if you rewatch this film, you start noticing all these famous people in this movie by going like, hey, that's that person from this show, that's that person from here. And that's what gets you captivated and you watch it all the way through. As for serious cons, this movie, it had the potential to be a good movie all the way around. And I think this is the reason why it didn't do it, because there's 3 alternative endings. And when they try to play that off, they try to be smart in a time when it was not really smart to do that. So if you were a moviegoer, why would you go see the movie 3 times? Now when we have the DVD, the Blu-ray, or even when it comes out on TV, we see all 3 endings playing back to back to back. And one last thing, it was tried too hard to be a murder mystery without actually putting clues. So with that, I'm going to pass it on to Touly and see how he saw this movie.
I think you hit it on the mark by saying it has this murder sort of element to it. It's also being described, I guess, characterized by being a comedy as well. But I thought the comedy portion of it was too absurd that it kind of lost me for most of the film. They provided a lot of background for these characters and how they sort of tie to one another, to who ended up dying throughout the film, etc., but there weren't enough clues, as you put it too, where it made me as an audience felt engaged as to like who was the murderer, and just the revelation of who ended up being the murderer or the people who ended up being murderers in this film. It didn't come about very naturally as well. Like when it came to, at that point, just the butler coming to the survivors and revealing to them that, he has figured out who the murderer is or who he potentially did. He walked everybody through the film again. That was way too much for my taste. And that's where I said the film didn't quite naturally transition into that revelation. They had to, or they went the long about way. And even the characters themselves, I'm not sure they were trying to break the fourth wall or anything by saying, yeah, you're talking way too much. Like, there was a point where I think the butler, I forget his name, but him just rewalking the entire movie again. It's like, why do I need to see this? You think I don't remember the sequence of events because you guys haven't really offered anything that was too elaborately schemed for me to remember. Like, there was nothing that was so obscure that, I missed. Like, everything you guys showed was up front. Nothing really caught me off guard or anything. And it didn't help that, like I said, because the comedy aspect was so absurd that I didn't really care about the characters either. You guys were giving them all these unique background and, like I said, how they connected to one another, but the film just didn't do a good job developing these characters and how they interacted with one another. It just felt too goofy. For some, maybe it's enough for them to say it sort of symbolizes what the board game Clue is to them. Maybe this is how these characters really would have acted and whatnot, but I could accept that, I could accept some sense of ludicrousy, but this was way too overboard from most of the film. I don't really know where the relevancy of this film it is in terms of pop culture. I could take a guess. Maybe I could treat this as an escape room sort of film and how it sort of relates to a lot of the pop culture films that have come out of it. Things like Saw, things like the escape room film that I think Sal and I reviewed a couple months back. Things of that nature. I guess that's maybe a relevancy of this film that sort of paved the way in terms of its execution, me caring about the characters. It was just way too far-fetched for me to sympathize for what happened or who ended up being the murderer and stuff. There was just no natural flow to the film, and it was just one empty discovery after the other, and I'm supposed to just take it for what it is in terms of a character explain what happened. And I guess, like I said, it was going to be through the voice of the butler, who of course came to be Mr. Body in one of the endings. And also, speaking of the endings, I couldn't really care less about which ending it was, because like I said, none of the endings really made sense to me. You could have come up with anything to satisfy the narrative, or maybe that again it makes sense with the board game, because the board game it just depends on how players interacted with their environment, and of course it had to come to some sort of resolution overall. And I guess maybe the film was trying to do that, or maybe portray that where it didn't matter what really happened, we're just going to try to through some sort of narrative just connect these somehow, whether or not it makes sense or not. So maybe it was just one of those things where the storytelling element of it from a board game platform is more suitable versus it being converted to a live action film. Or maybe they just did a very bad job at executing this into a live action film as well, which I'm more on board on. I just felt like it could have been a better film if it was produced with a more story-driven character development sort of drive, but it just wasn't there for me.
Yeah, I get your points, and I know that a lot of people have the same opinion as you. They don't get this movie. They don't understand where it was going to or where it was coming from. But I'm going to play to the devil's advocate, and I can tell you that the design of the set was actually really well done according to the board game. Everything was almost the same as the board game. There was little Easter eggs here and there. The characters and the story, I feel that they weren't supposed to be taken. There is no story, and they were not supposed to be taken seriously. That's why this movie became a cult classic, because of the one-liners. If that's how I saw it, this was a movie where the characters were improvising, and it was like you watching a play on stage. And there is that alternative ending where Miss White starts talking about how she hates Yvette, and she's talking about the flames on the side of her head and everything. That was not supposed to be in there, but yet it still stayed in there. And that's one of the most famous lines that a lot of people nowadays quote as being like, wow, that's like hilarious, because it doesn't make sense. So in a sense, you have to see this movie without paying attention to the actual murder mystery. Instead, you have to enjoy that it's the one-liners, like I think it's Colonel Mustard is asking the butler, are we the only ones here, or do I assume that there's no one else is in the house? And the butler's saying yes, no, yes, no. And he's like really like not giving him a straight answer, and everybody gets frustrated. And I believe that you were like, like, I can't take this. But it's the same thing as the characters. They're like getting upset because the butler's not really telling them everything. He's feeding them crumbs. The endings are not clear. And I believe that I want to say it's the reason it was done, because it was the board game. And the board game, like you said, there's many possibilities that are absurd, but there's always a clear ending in the board game. I'm going to throw this at you guys. And I don't know how you're going to feel about this, but there's talks about a remake. I'm on board with the remake now that we have Netflix doing these alternative endings, pick your own ending thing. If they make Clue in the Netflix format and you get to pick your own storyline, I think that would be a more interesting way of going about the remake versus if you're going to go see it in theaters. I don't know how I would take it if they're telling you go to theaters and there's 3 alternate endings, so you have to go multiple times. I don't know if I would be okay with that, but if it's on Netflix and I get to pick my own storyline, I think that's going to be an interesting factor. So for people out there, I don't know how you feel, if you're on board with my idea, or maybe you're like Touly and you don't want to see this film ever again. But to me, it wasn't a big hit when it came out, but slowly I started getting used to it, and I have a dear spot for it in my heart that I like some of the one-liners and everything. I'm going to say it's almost like wine. The more it ages, the more funny it comes out. And you don't have to take the movie seriously. You just have to basically say, hey, it is what it is. You know, it was 1985. What can you say? And one last thing I'm going to add to this. For the character Miss Scarlet, one of the people who was actually being in the run to get casted was Carrie Fisher, but they had to switch her at the last minute because she went into rehab back in those days. So that's another thing. If you could imagine the character Miss Scarlet being played by Carrie Fisher, that's something I'm always thinking about. How would that have been, you know? But other than that, it is what it is. This movie, you either like it or you hate it. So with that, I'm going to ask Touly for his final grade.
I'm going to give this film a 4.5 out of 10. Just so that you guys kind of see where I'm coming from too. And Sal pointed it out, but I want to make sure that I'm clear about where I'm coming from. I'm not treating this film as from like a very serious perspective. In retrospect to looking for the nitty gritties and what makes a film great. Again, that's why I started my preface with saying I understand that it's a mystery comedy. So, you know, there's going to be stuff about it that's going to be absurd. But for me, throughout most of the film, it was too absurd. So that's where it kind of lost. Comedy, there are a lot of comedy films out there that are good, but for me, this just wasn't one of them because of all those things that I mentioned about things just being over to the top too consistently. My lack of enjoyment in the end sort of, you know, was derived from. So yeah, 4.5 out of 10. I would give it at best an average score.
I see your point. A lot of people won't like this movie, but I don't like the story. I only watched this movie because of the one-liners and how the characters deliver it. I'm a big Tim Curry fan, and this is one of his roles that I can see him as the butler and just take it like that's him, you know? It's not one of his best roles, but still, most of these characters I have seen in other films or shows, and I'm like, hey, just for their one-liners, that's what I watch it for. So for me, I'm going to basically say that this is a movie that I can watch and just keep quoting, you know, with other people and just have fun. So I'm going to give it a 7 out of 10. So with that does it for this review of Clue. Please join us next time when we're going to review Rambo: First Blood.
Are you telling me that 200 men against your boy is a no-win situation for us?
You send that many, don't forget one thing.
What?
A good supply of body bags.
And remember, social media is down in the description. Hit the subscribe button and keep watching movies.